What happens when the perfect life shatters in the most public and private way imaginable for Isabella Rossi. Sterling. The answer wasn't tears or screaming matches in a crowded restaurant. It was colder, more calculated. It began with a simple notification on her phone, a 5-figure charge at an exclusive baby boutique. The problem, her billionaire husband Ethan was supposed to be in a board meeting across town, and the woman he was with buying a crib identical to the one Isabella had just chosen for their unborn child was most certainly not her. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens next. It's about how a betrayed wife, in a matter of hours, turned her deepest wound into her greatest weapon. And didn't just get even. She bought the entire battlefield. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park always smelled of something expensive and serene. Today it was a custom blend of white tea and peonies, a scent Isabella had commissioned to promote calm during her 3rd trimester. Everything was calm. Everything was perfect. Isabella Rossi Sterling traced the rim of her chamomile tea, her gaze drifting around the living room. The plush cream-colored sofas, the curated art on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows that drank in the New York City skyline. It was all a testament to the life she and Ethan had built, a life of quiet luxury, of whispered influence, of a partnership that was the envy of their circle. Ethan Sterling wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan of the tech industry. His company Nexus Dynamics had revolutionized data security, and he was the charming, brilliant face of it all. He had pursued Isabella with a single-minded intensity that she'd found intoxicating. She wasn't just another socialite, the daughter of Marcus Rossi, a formidable figure in old money real estate. Isabella had her own MBA, her own sharp mind for business that she'd willingly put on hold. For Ethan, for them, for the baby girl growing steadily beneath her heart. Her phone chimed a soft, unobtrusive sound. She glanced at it, expecting a message from her mother or an update from her obstetrician. It was a notification from their joint black card. Transaction alert, Cherub's Cradle. $12,450, $9.98. Isabella frowned. Cherub's Cradle. That was the boutique she had just spent 3 hours in yesterday, painstakingly selecting every item for the nursery. She had fallen in love with a ridiculously expensive but exquisitely crafted convertible crib from Italy, the Celeste model. The price down to the cent was burned into her memory, because she'd felt a pang of guilt spending so much even for them. She hadn't bought it yet. She'd wanted to show Ethan the pictures first to share the moment with him. She had placed the entire order on hold. He must have gone to surprise me, she thought, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was just like Ethan, a grand, impulsive gesture. He'd probably seen how much she loved it and decided to just take care of it. The board meeting he'd mentioned must have ended early. She texted him, her fingers flying across the screen. "Did you just do something very sweet and very expensive at Cherub's Cradle? You're going to spoil this baby before she even arrives." She waited. 1 minute, 5, 10. The 3 little dots that signified he was typing appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Finally, a reply came through. "Board meeting from hell. Still locked in. We'll be late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The air in the room suddenly felt thin, the scent of peonies cloying and suffocating. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, snaked its way up her spine, wrapping itself around her heart. It was a feeling so alien in her perfect life that for a moment she couldn't place it. It was pure, unadulterated fear. She read his text again. Still locked in. She looked at the credit card notification. The timestamp was from 11 minutes ago. The two statements were irreconcilable. They were two separate, contradictory facts that could not exist in the same universe. Yet here they were, glowing on the screen of her phone. One of them was a lie, and it wasn't the bank. Isabella stood up, her movements stiff. She walked into the nursery, a room painted in the softest shade of dove grey. The rocker was assembled in the corner. Tiny cashmere booties sat on a shelf. In the center of the room was an empty space, waiting for the Celeste crib. The crib that someone had just purchased. Someone who was with her husband. Her mind, the sharp analytical mind she'd honed in business school, began to fire up, pushing through the initial shockwave of pain. She needed data. She needed confirmation. This single point of contradictory information was not enough. It was an anomaly, but she needed to see the pattern. She pulled up the live location tracking on their shared family app, a feature Ethan himself had insisted on for security. She rarely used it, trusting him implicitly. Her finger trembled as she tapped his icon. A small, smiling picture of Ethan appeared on a map. He wasn't at the Nexus Dynamics headquarters downtown. He was on Madison Avenue, precisely where the flagship Cherub's Cradle store was located. The blue dot representing his phone had been stationary there for the last 45 minutes. The lie wasn't just a text. It was a calculated, deliberate deception. He was there. He had bought the crib, and he had lied to her face about it. The question wasn't if he was lying anymore. It was why. And more terrifyingly, who was he with? The grand romantic gesture she had imagined moments ago curdled into something monstrous. He wasn't buying it for her. He was buying it with someone else. Her breathing grew shallow. She had to see. This abstract, digital pain needed a face. She grabbed her purse, her car keys, and a pair of oversized sunglasses. As she walked out of the apartment, the doorman, a kind man named Frank, who had known her for years, smiled. Off to enjoy this beautiful day, Mrs. Sterling. Isabella forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. Something like that, Frank. The drive to Madison Avenue was a blur. Her hands were steady on the wheel of her Maserati, a stark contrast to the earthquake happening inside her. She was on autopilot, her mind a whirring engine of scenarios, each one more painful than the last. She parked a block away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She put on the sunglasses, pulled up the collar of her trench coat, and walked towards the pristine, gold-leafed entrance of Cherub's Cradle. Through the large display window she could see them. Ethan was laughing, his head thrown back in that easy, charismatic way that always made her heart flutter. He looked relaxed, happy. He was holding the door open, and walking out of it, her hand resting possessively on his arm, was a woman. Isabella knew her. Vaguely. Chloe Summers, a junior marketing analyst from his company. Young, ambitious, with blonde hair that was a little too bright and a smile that was a little too wide. She was clutching a Cherub's Cradle shopping bag, and behind them, 2 store employees were carefully loading the large, flat-packed boxes of the Celeste crib into the back of Ethan's sleek black Rivian, the one he always called his weekend car. Isabella froze on the sidewalk, shielded by the flow of pedestrians. It was like watching a movie of her own life, but with her role recast. Chloe looked up at Ethan, said something that made him smile, and then she did something that shattered the last vestiges of Isabella's denial. She rose on her tiptoes and gave him a quick, familiar kiss. It wasn't a passionate embrace. It was something worse. It was casual, intimate, the kind of kiss shared between two people who believed they were completely alone in their shared world. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the chatter, the distant sirens faded into a dull roar. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. People don't buy $12,000 cribs for a one-night stand. This was a parallel life. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was building a new family, a replacement. And he was using the very blueprint of the life he was supposed to be building with her with their child. The betrayal was so audacious, so profoundly cruel, it transcended simple infidelity. It was an act of erasure. A hot, blinding rage began to burn away the cold shock. But Isabella Rossi was her father's daughter. Marcus Rossi had once told her, "Revenge is a dish best served cold, Bella." But true power is owning the restaurant, the farm, and the entire supply chain. She watched them drive away, laughing off to their secret life with her dream crib in the back of their car. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stood on that Madison Avenue sidewalk, the city bustling around her, and a terrifyingly calm, diamond-hard resolve settled in her soul. He had taken her future. He had taken her dreams. He was trying to take her identity. She took out her phone. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She scrolled through her contacts to the one person who would understand the language of war. Her father. Marcus Rossi answered on the first ring. "Isabella, everything all right? You sound. I need your help, Dad," Isabella said, her voice steady, devoid of any emotion. "I need your corporate intelligence team. I want to know everything about a company called Cherub's Cradle. Who owns it? What their financials look like. And I need to know if it's for sale." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus Rossi, a man who could smell a bad deal from a mile away, knew this wasn't about nursery furniture. "He didn't just break your heart, did he, Bella?" His voice was low, dangerous. "No, Dad," Isabella replied, her eyes fixed on the now empty storefront of Cherub's Cradle. "He declared war." The following 48 hours were a masterclass in compartmentalization. To the outside world, and more importantly to Ethan Isabella, was the picture of a serene, expectant mother. She feigned a headache the night of the discovery, blaming it on her pregnancy, which allowed her to retreat to their bedroom suite alone. While Ethan slept soundly in a guest room, a courtesy he claimed was to avoid disturbing her, Isabella was wide awake, her laptop casting a pale blue glow in the darkness. Her father's team was brutally efficient. By 3 a.m., her encrypted inbox began to fill with data. Cherub's Cradle wasn't a mom-and-pop shop. It was a national chain of 52 high-end boutiques, the gold standard in luxury children's retail. It was owned by a mid-tier private equity firm, Northgate Holdings, which had acquired it 5 years prior in a leveraged buyout. The initial reports were promising in a grim sort of way. Northgate was in trouble. 2 of their other major investments in the retail sector had gone belly up in the post-pandemic market. They were over-leveraged and bleeding cash. Whispers on Wall Street, sourced by her father's contacts, suggested they were looking to quietly offload their more stable assets to cover their losses. Cherub's Cradle was their crown jewel, but even jewels get sold to pay the bills. It wasn't officially on the market, but an unsolicited serious offer would not be ignored. It would be a lifeline. Isabella spent the night poring over balance sheets, profit and loss statements, and market projections. The anger that had initially fueled her was now being channeled refined into pure cold focus. This was a world she understood. Mergers, acquisitions, leveraging assets. This was the language her father had taught her at the dinner table. It was a language Ethan had always patronizingly dismissed as her family's little hobby. The next morning, she greeted Ethan with a gentle smile. "Feeling any better?" he asked, placing a hand on her swollen belly. His touch felt like a brand. "Much better," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I think I just overdid it yesterday." "You need to take it easy," he said, his face a mask of loving concern. "The baby and you are all that matters." The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost breathtaking. Isabella wanted to scream. Instead, she adjusted his tie. "You have that big presentation for the Phoenix group today. Don't you knock them dead, darling." He kissed her forehead. "Always." The moment he was gone, she was on a secure video call with her father and his legal team. Marcus Rossi's face filled the screen, his expression grim but proud. "It's viable, Bella. Northgate is hungry for a quiet, fast deal. They won't want the negative press of a public sale. We can make this happen." "But how?" Isabella asked, the first flicker of doubt appearing. "We're married. Our assets are intertwined. The moment I move a significant amount of money, he'll be notified. He'll see my name on the paperwork." This was where her father's genius for long-term strategy came into play. "He will see nothing," Marcus said with a thin smile. "Do you remember the prenuptial agreement Ethan was so eager for you to sign?" Isabella remembered it well. Ethan's lawyers had drafted a document that meticulously protected all his premarital assets and the future earnings of Nexus Dynamics. At the time, she had found it clinical and a little insulting, but she'd signed it without a fight, wanting to prove she wasn't after his money. "I remember," she said bitterly. "It basically walls off his entire repo." "Correct," Marcus said. "But my lawyers added a clause that Ethan's team barely glanced at because they were so focused on protecting his assets. It's Article 11, Section B, the incubator clause. It stipulates that any independent business venture you initiate during the marriage, funded by capital from a pre-established trust, remains your sole and separate property, completely firewalled from the marital estate." Isabella's eyes widened. The trust. When she had married Ethan, her father had set up a $50 million trust fund in her name. He'd told her it was her walkaway fund, a safety net she should never have to use. Ethan knew about the trust, but he viewed it as a quaint gesture from an overprotective father. He had no idea about the power hidden within the legal jargon of their prenup. "The trust was the seed capital," Isabella breathed, understanding dawning. "And the prenup is the key." "Exactly," her father confirmed. "We'll form a new shell corporation, a Delaware C Corp. It will have a neutral, forgettable name, Bellina Enterprises. We'll use the trust to fund it. The offer will be made from Bellina to Northgate. Your name will appear nowhere on the initial offer documents. I will act as the official representative. By the time the deal is finalized and ownership is transferred, it will be a fait accompli. He won't know a thing until you decide to tell him." The plan was audacious. It was brilliant. It was hers. The next phase was a whirlwind of activity conducted in secret. Isabella turned a spare guest room into her war room. While Ethan was at the office, or she sickeningly presumed with Chloe, Isabella was on encrypted calls with bankers, lawyers, and M&A specialists. She analyzed store performance metrics, supply chain logistics, and brand positioning. She wasn't just buying a company to spite her husband. She was making the biggest investment of her life, and she would be damned if she was going to fail. A new, potent feeling began to bloom within her excitement. The dormant parts of her brain, the ambition she had suppressed for so long, were roaring back to life. She was rediscovering a part of herself she thought she had lost, or worse, willingly given away. The biggest challenge was maintaining the facade. That evening, Ethan came home beaming. "We landed the Phoenix Group a 9-figure deal. We have to celebrate." He wanted to take her to their favorite Michelin-starred restaurant. The thought of sitting across from him, making small talk, while her entire world was being secretly dismantled and rebuilt, was nauseating. "Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful," she cooed, forcing excitement into her voice. "But I'm just so tired tonight. Pregnancy, you know. Could we just order in? And maybe you could give me a foot rub." It was the perfect move. It played into his perception of her as the delicate, pregnant wife who needed coddling. His ego stroked, he readily agreed. As he massaged her tired feet, talking animatedly about his business triumph, Isabella lay on the sofa, a serene smile on her face. Inside her mind was calculating the debt-to-equity ratio for her acquisition of Cherub's Cradle. She felt a flicker of guilt, not for the deception, but for how surprisingly easy it was, how good she was at it. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 days later. Her legal team needed leverage a way to ensure Northgate accepted their initial offer without a protracted negotiation. The answer, ironically, came from Ethan himself. Isabella was tidying his home office, a place she rarely entered, when she saw a document left carelessly on his desk. It was a market analysis report he'd commissioned. The topic: emerging competitors in the luxury children's retail space. His company was considering a strategic investment in the sector, a potential diversification play. The report highlighted Cherub's Cradle as a prime target, but also detailed a new aggressive online competitor, Little Sprouts Collective, that was rapidly eating into their market share with a direct-to-consumer model. The report was Ethan's vulnerability, and she now held it in her hands. She quickly scanned it to her secure drive. Her team used the information masterfully. In their final offer to Northgate, they subtly referenced the market pressures from disruptors like Little Sprouts, showing they were aware of the cracks in Cherub's Cradle's armor. They made it clear that their offer was firm fare, and most importantly, fast. It was a take-it-or-leave-it deal that offered Northgate a clean, quiet exit before the market caught wind of their struggles. On a Thursday afternoon, 1 week after she had seen Ethan and Chloe outside the boutique, Isabella sat in her father's downtown office. The final papers were in front of her. The deal was done. Bellina Enterprises, her company, was now the sole owner of Cherub's Cradle, LLC, and all its assets. She signed the last page her signature, a firm, decisive stroke. "It's done," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. He placed a hand over hers. "What now, Bella?" Isabella looked out the window at the sprawling city below. For the first time in a week, she let the mask slip. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of catharsis, of release. "Now," she said, her voice a low, steady hum of power, "I go home and wait for my husband to return." The penthouse that evening felt different. The air was still charged with unspoken truths. Isabella had dismissed the household staff for the night, wanting absolute privacy for the storm she was about to unleash. She'd changed out of her soft maternity clothes and into a sharp navy blue sheath dress that was professional, yet couldn't hide the gentle curve of her pregnancy. It was a statement she was both a mother-to-be and a businesswoman. She was both vulnerable and formidable. She didn't wait in the living room. She went to the nursery. The empty space in the middle of the room seemed to mock her, a void representing the future that had been stolen. But now it felt like something else, a blank slate, an opportunity. She heard the front door open and close, followed by Ethan's familiar footsteps. "Bella, you in here?" He called out, his voice echoing slightly in the large apartment. "In the nursery," she replied, her voice calm and even. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. He smiled when he saw her. "Thinking about our little girl." He walked in his guard completely down. He was home in his sanctuary with his loving wife. He was safe. "I was," Isabella said, turning to face him fully. "I was thinking about all the things she'll need. A place to sleep, to feel safe." "Don't you worry about a thing," he said, stepping closer. "I'll buy her the whole world. I was thinking we should go back to Cherub's cradle this weekend, you and I, and we can finally buy that crib you loved so much, the Celeste." There it was, the casual, breathtaking audacity. He was going to reenact the purchase with her, letting her believe it was their special moment, all while another Celeste crib was likely already assembled in Chloe Summers's apartment. Isabella's heart didn't race. It grew steady like a war drum. "That's funny," she said, her tone light conversational. "Cherub's cradle. I was just thinking about them." "It's a great store," Ethan said, oblivious. "Top of the line." "It is," Isabella agreed. "They have a wonderful customer loyalty program, you know. It tracks all your purchases. It's very detailed. They know exactly who their best customers are." A flicker of something unease crossed Ethan's face. He wasn't following. "Okay. Good for them, I guess." Isabella took a small step towards him, the hunter closing the distance. For instance, they would have a record of a recent purchase, say last Wednesday, around 2:15 p.m., for a Celeste crib, a matching changing table, and a few other accessories, totaling $12,450.98. The color drained from Ethan's face. The specific numbers, the exact day and time. This wasn't a guess. "Bella, what are you talking about?" He stammered, his jovial mask beginning to crack. "I'm talking about your board meeting, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping, losing all its warmth. "The one you were locked in. The one that was actually on Madison Avenue. The one that included Chloe Summers." He recoiled as if struck. I don't know what you're talking about. You're not making any sense. You must be mistaken." Isabella gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Mistaken? Oh, Ethan, don't insult my intelligence. It's the one thing you can't afford to lose." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out her phone. She swiped to a photo and held it up. It was a clear shot taken from across the street of him and Chloe, kissing outside the store. He stared at the image, speechless. The proof was irrefutable. His face cycled through a series of emotions. Shock, denial, fear, and finally, a flash of anger. He was cornered. "All right," he finally said, his voice low and tight. "All right. It's not what it looks like." "Isn't it?" Isabella countered, putting her phone away. "It looks like you're having an affair. It looks like you're setting up a second life. It looks like you bought another woman, the exact same crib you knew I wanted for our daughter. So please enlighten me. What part of that am I getting wrong?" "It was a mistake," he choked out, desperation creeping in. "A stupid, meaningless mistake. Chloe, she means nothing to me. I love you, Bella. You and the baby. It was a moment of weakness. I was going to end it. The classic pathetic script of the cheating husband. Isabella had expected it. She was ready for it. A moment of weakness, she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. A moment doesn't involve a coordinated lie, a shopping spree for a secret life, and building a nursery for your mistress. That's not weakness, Ethan. That's a strategy. And I'm a big believer in strategy. She walked past him towards the doorway. I had a very busy week, too. While you were playing house, I was doing a little shopping of my own. He looked at her confused. What did you buy? A purse, shoes, Bella. Whatever you want, it's yours. We can get through this. Isabella turned back to face him, standing in the doorway of the nursery, framing herself against the empty space. She allowed a small, predatory smile to touch her lips. It's funny you mention that, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Because what I wanted, I already bought. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it was a physical presence in the room. I bought Cherub's cradle, she said simply. Ethan stared at her blankly. He even let out a small, confused laugh. What the store that's not funny, Bella? This isn't the time for a duos. I have never been more serious in my entire life, she replied, her gaze as hard as granite. I own it, all 52 stores, the distribution centers, the supply chain, the brand, everything. It's all mine, solely. Article 11, Section B of our prenup. You should have your lawyers read the fine print next time. The reality of her words began to slowly, horrifically dawn on him. The sheer scale of it, the impossibility of it. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as his pretty, docile wife, but as a ruthless opponent he had fatally underestimated. You can't, he stammered. How, while you were underestimating me, I was leveraging my assets. Bellina Enterprises sends its regards, she said coldly. And as the new owner, I have access to some very interesting data. Customer purchase histories, for instance. I know every single item you purchased with Chloe. I have the shipping address for the duplicate nursery you were building her. I even have her loyalty account number. She took another step towards him, her voice now laced with ice. You didn't just cheat on me, Ethan. You gave me the receipts, and then you handed me the entire company that printed them. You declared war on the wrong woman. On the beautifully lacquered hallway table just outside the nursery, a thick manila envelope had been sitting unnoticed. Isabella gestured towards it. Those are the divorce papers, she said. They've already been filed. I'm dissolving the marriage on grounds of adultery, with a mountain of evidence that is now quite literally my business asset. I am petitioning for sole custody of our daughter. My lawyers are very confident. She looked at him. Truly looked at the man she once loved and saw nothing but a stranger, a fool who had mistaken her kindness for weakness. The locks will be changed in the morning, she continued, her voice clinical and final. A car is waiting downstairs to take you to a hotel. Your assistant has already been instructed to pack a bag. All your personal belongings will be sent to you in due course. You are no longer welcome in this home. Ethan's face was a mask of utter devastation. It wasn't just the loss of his wife and child. It was the humiliation, the complete and total outmaneuvering. He had been playing checkers while she was playing a game of corporate chess he didn't even know had begun. He opened his mouth to speak, to plead, to rage, but no words came out. He had been stripped of everything, his power, his secrets, his home, in the space of 10 minutes. Isabella looked at him one last time, standing broken in the middle of the nursery he had desecrated. By the way, she added, delivering the final crushing blow, There's a clause in my new company's employee handbook about conduct detrimental to the brand. Fraternizing with the husband of the owner would certainly qualify. I'll be seeing Chloe in my new office on Monday morning. We have a lot to discuss about her future, or lack thereof. With that, she turned her back on him and walked away, leaving him alone in the empty room, the silence of his ruin deafening. The silence that descended upon the penthouse after Ethan's departure was more profound than any sound. Isabella stood motionless in the nursery doorway, listening to the hum of the elevator, carrying her husband, her soon-to-be ex-husband, out of her life. He hadn't raged or pleaded. The fight had drained out of him the moment he understood the totality of his defeat. He had simply stared at the divorce papers on the table, then at her face, his own, a pale, hollow mask of disbelief. He moved like a man in a trance, collecting his coat and briefcase, before walking out without another word. The click of the closing door echoing like a gunshot in the vast apartment. Only then did the adrenaline that had coursed through her veins, a cold fire of purpose, finally recede. It left in its wake a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Her hand went to her swollen belly, a protective, instinctual gesture. For the first time in a week, she allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of it all. Not just the anger, but the grief. A sob, thick and ragged, escaped her lips. It wasn't for the man who had just left, but for the man she thought she had married. It was a funeral for the future she had so joyfully anticipated, a life built on a foundation of lies. She sank into the rocking chair in the nursery, the one she had imagined herself in with her baby, and wept. She wept for her lost innocence, for the trust so casually annihilated, for the daughter who would now be born into a fractured family. But Isabella Rossi's tears were not a sign of surrender. They were a baptism. As the dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across the floor, her tears dried. The grief remained a hard kernel deep inside her, but it was now encased in a new layer of diamond-hard resolve. The war was not over. She had only won the first decisive battle. Now, she had to win the peace. By 9 a.m., she was in a secure conference room at her father's firm. A team of lawyers and PR specialists assembled around her. Marcus Rossi, his face a thundercloud of paternal fury, was advocating for total war. "We release everything, Bella," he urged, his fist clenching on the table. "The photos, the credit cards, statements, the address of the love nest. We destroy him publicly. We leave no doubt in anyone's mind what he is." Isabella, sipping a calming chamomile tea, slowly shook her head. "No, Dad." Her voice was quiet, yet it commanded the room's absolute attention. "A messy public scandal benefits no one. It would drag our daughter into the mud before she's even born. It paints me as a victim, a scorned woman. I am not a victim." She leaned forward, her eyes meeting those of the lead PR strategist, a sharp woman named Diana. "Ethan's world is built on a single pillar, the perception of his brilliance. He's the infallible tech genius, the man who is always 10 steps ahead. We don't need to attack his character. We just need to dismantle his myth. A scandal is messy. Being outsmarted is fatal." The strategy they crafted over the next hour was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. There would be no salacious leaks. Instead, a carefully worded statement would be released to key financial publications. It would announce the divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Simultaneously, the news of Bellina Enterprises' acquisition of Cherub's Cradle would be made public, with Isabella Rossi named as the new CEO. The narrative would be meticulously shaped. Isabella, a savvy businesswoman in her own right, had identified a prime investment opportunity that her husband had overlooked, creating a fundamental conflict of professional interest that made the marriage untenable. The story was brilliant in its subtlety. It didn't accuse Ethan of adultery. It accused him of something far worse in his world incompetence. It suggested that while he was distracted, his wife, the one he had relegated to decorating nurseries, had executed a 9-figure acquisition right under his nose. It positioned her as a formidable player, and him as a man who couldn't even manage his own house, let alone a multi-billion-dollar company. The humiliation was not in the sin, but in the sheer ineptitude it implied. While the lawyers and publicists went to work, Isabella handled the final personal piece of house cleaning. She made a single phone call to her new head of operations at Cherub's Cradle. Her instructions were precise and unemotional. A professional moving crew was dispatched to Chloe Summers's apartment building. They were not to engage with her. They were to present the building's concierge with a legal order for the retrieval of company property, citing the purchase made on a corporate account, now under new ownership. Every item, the Celeste crib, the changing table, the designer diaper bag, the tiny untouched onesies, was professionally packed and removed. Chloe received a sterile email from Human Resources informing her that her employment was terminated, effective immediately for gross misconduct. Her affair didn't end in a dramatic confrontation with the wife. It ended with a courier delivering a box of her personal desk items and a silent, efficient crew erasing every trace of the future she thought she had secured. The items were not returned to a warehouse. Per Isabella's final chilling instruction, they were transported to a private disposal facility and incinerated, turning the entire sordid affair to ash. It was a cleansing, a final definitive statement that his parallel life was not only over, but had never truly existed. The final months of Isabellas' pregnancy were a blur of creation. She was building 2 lives simultaneously. She would spend her mornings on conference calls, debating supply chain logistics and marketing strategies, her bare feet propped up to ease the swelling. She would spend her afternoons in the empty brownstone she had purchased, directing painters and designers, creating a true home. While her body was creating a new life, her mind was forging a new legacy. 2 weeks before her due date, Isabella was in the hospital. After a short and intense labor, she gave birth to a perfectly healthy 7-pound baby girl with a full head of dark hair and her mother's determined gaze. When Marcus Rossi came into the room, his gruff exterior melted as he looked at his first grandchild. "She's beautiful, Bella," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She looks like you." He looked at the hospital bracelet. Serafina. A beautiful name. Serafina Sterling. Isabella, holding her daughter close, gently shook her head. A serene, unshakable certainty settled over her. "No, Dad," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Her name is Serafina Rossi. She will carry my name." The name of the family that supported her, protected her, and built her future before she even arrived. Marcus looked at his daughter, truly seeing the woman she had become, a queen, solidifying her own dynasty. He simply nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "Serafina Rossi," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." The world outside the hospital room reacted just as Isabella had predicted. Ethan Sterling became a social pariah. At the galas and charity balls that were once his stage, he was now an outcast. Old colleagues would offer curt nods and move away. Conversations would halt when he approached. The whispers followed him like a shadow, not of his infidelity, but of his folly. That's the guy whose wife bought a company out from under him. His aura of invincibility shattered. The Phoenix Group, spooked by the instability and the whiff of incompetence, quietly pulled out of their 9-figure deal. Nexus Dynamics, stock once a darling of the market, began its long, inexorable salide. Isabella, meanwhile, was starting over. The day she brought Serafina home was not to the cold glass penthouse, but to the warm, welcoming brownstone. As she stood in the doorway, her baby cradled in her arms, she looked around at the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the vibrant, joyful colors she had chosen. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. On a table in the foyer lay the architectural blueprints for the new Cherub's Cradle flagship store. Her reign was just beginning. She looked down at the sleeping face of her daughter, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it eclipsed any pain she had ever felt. This was her victory. Not the destruction of a man, but the creation of a future. Her future. Their future. 2 years passed, not as a blur, but as a series of distinct, deliberate moments of creation. The cold, impersonal expanse of the Central Park penthouse was a distant memory, a photograph from someone else's life. Isabella's world was now contained within the warm, embracing walls of a 5-story brownstone on a tree-lined street on the Upper East Side. Where the penthouse had smelled of curated artificial scents, this house smelled of life itself, of fresh coffee brewing in the mornings, of the buttery scent of cookies baking on a Sunday afternoon, of the faint, clean aroma of lavender and chamomile that clung to her daughter's things. This was Serafina's house. Her gleeful crayon drawings, abstract masterpieces of color and joy, were held by proud magnets on the stainless steel refrigerator. Her tiny shoes were perpetually scattered by the door, and her laughter was the home's true soundtrack. Here Isabella was not a sterling, a name she had shed like a heavy, ill-fitting coat. She was Isabella Rossi. She was CEO. But most importantly, she was Mama. This transformation was mirrored in her professional life. Cherub's Cradle under her command had undergone a renaissance. It was no longer a sterile repository of luxury goods for the ultra-wealthy. It was a brand with a soul, a purpose. In a tense board meeting a year prior, her own father, Marcus, had advised against her most radical proposal, the Bellina Foundation. "It's a noble idea, Bella," he had argued, his voice full of cautious pragmatism. "But dedicating 5% of net profits to grants for single mothers is a significant drain on our bottom line. The shareholders won't like it." Isabella had stood at the head of the long, polished table, Serafina's picture smiling from the frame on her desk. "With respect, Dad," she had said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "Our shareholders' biggest asset isn't our profit margin. It's our brand identity. We are not just selling cribs, we are selling security support and empowerment. The Bellina Foundation isn't a drain, it's the very core of that message. It tells our customers that we stand with them not just in the transaction, but in their lives. It's an investment in loyalty and meaning that will pay dividends far beyond what a balance sheet can show." She had won the vote. The foundation became a celebrated pillar of the company, and just as she predicted, the brand loyalty it engendered drove profits to all-time highs. She had built what Ethan could never comprehend, an empire with empathy at its core. She launched workshops in the flagship stores on everything from infant CPR to navigating the return to the workforce. She created a thriving online community, a digital village where mothers could connect and share, and she would often personally log in late at night to offer a word of encouragement to a new mum struggling with a 3 a.m. feeding. One crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the New York sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue, Isabella was walking through the Madison Avenue flagship. The store was almost unrecognizable. The cold, museum-like displays were gone, replaced by a warm, welcoming space. A small cafe served artisanal coffee and pastries, and its soft murmur of conversation filled the air. In a soundproofed corner, a quiet zone offered a serene space for mothers to feed or calm their babies. Isabella watched as Serafina, now a confident toddler, with a head full of dark curls, carefully placed a wooden block on top of a tower being built by another small child. A perfect, unprompted moment of collaboration. Later that day, after putting a tired but happy Serafina to bed, Isabella was in her home office, overlooking the twinkling lights of her neighborhood. She was reviewing quarterly reports when a notification pinged on her tablet. It was from a major financial journal. The headline was stark: "End of an empire nexus dynamics to be dismantled and sold for parts. Founder Ethan Sterling steps down." She tapped the link, her expression unreadable. She read the article not as a jilted ex-wife, but as the CEO she had become. The analysis was clinical. After Sterling's scandalous divorce, the polite term the media had settled on market confidence had wavered. His subsequent erratic decision-making, a series of failed high-risk ventures meant to quickly recoup his reputation, had hemorrhaged capital. The Phoenix Group deal, his last great hope, had been the first domino to fall. Without it, his over-leveraged company began to collapse under its own weight. His arrogance had been a fatal blind spot, preventing him from seeing the cracks until the entire foundation gave way. Isabella leaned back in her chair. The emotion she felt was not the hot fire of victory or the cold satisfaction of revenge. It was a profound, quiet detachment. He was a business case study, a cautionary tale of a man who built a fortress of glass and then was surprised when the world saw right through him. Her victory wasn't his failure. She had secured her victory the day she signed the papers to acquire Cherub's Cradle. His demise was merely a postscript, an echo in a room she had long since departed. She closed the tablet, the story of his ruin dismissed with a simple swipe of her finger. The next day, she found herself drawn back to the flagship store. She stood near the entrance watching a young, heavily pregnant woman wander in her face a mask of anxiety and awe. The woman looked utterly overwhelmed, adrift in a sea of choices. One of the impeccably trained sales associates began to approach, but Isabella raised a hand almost imperceptibly, stepping forward herself. "It feels like you're preparing for a moon landing, doesn't it?" Isabella said with a gentle, knowing smile. The woman started her eyes wide. "Yes, exactly. How did you know I feel like if I choose the wrong diaper pail, I've failed as a mother before I've even started?" Isabella laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I think every mother feels that way. My best advice, ignore all of this for a second." She gestured around the beautiful, perfectly curated store. "Close your eyes. Picture the quiet moments. You, your baby, in the middle of the night. What do you need in that moment? Not what the magazines say. Not what your mother-in-law insists on. What do you need to feel safe, comfortable, and capable? Start there. The rest is just window dressing." Tears welled in the young woman's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has asked me what I need." Isabella smiled and guided her towards the concierge desk. "Let's get you some tea, and we can just talk. No pressure to buy a thing." As the woman settled in, Isabella stepped away, her heart full. She had done it. She had built a haven. She took Serafina's small hand in hers and walked towards the grand glass doors. As they stepped out onto the familiar chaos of the Madison Avenue sidewalk, she paused. She looked at the reflection in the glass, a woman confident and serene, holding the hand of a happy, bright-eyed child. It was the same spot where 2 years ago she had stood invisible and broken, watching her world crumble. She had stood there as a victim of a story written by someone else. Now she was the author. She was not Isabella Rossi Sterling, the millionaire's wife. She was Isabella Rossi, the architect of her own life, the CEO of her own destiny, the empress of a kingdom built not on the rubble of revenge, but on the solid foundations of compassion, strength, and a mother's love. She looked down at Serafina, who pointed up at a passing butterfly. In that moment, Isabella knew her greatest acquisition had never been a company. It was herself. And looking forward into the bright, open future, she knew this was the only story, the only legacy that had ever truly mattered. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. She didn't just walk away from a broken marriage. She built an empire from its ruins. She transformed her pain into power, her heartbreak into a boardroom, and a story of infidelity into a saga of incredible success. This wasn't just revenge. It was a hostile takeover of her own destiny. She proved that the best response to being underestimated is to exceed every possible expectation. Her journey from a betrayed wife to a powerhouse CEO is a testament to the fact that sometimes the only way to get over a man who broke your world is to buy it, rebuild it, and make it infinitely better than it was before. If this story of ultimate resilience and strategic triumph resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of justice empowerment and incredible real-life drama.